Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a fantastic week. So, I'm coming to you live from Turks and Caicos. And this week, I've actually had the privilege of hosting all of FJ Labs and friends and family of FJ Labs to a big retreat. And the topic of the retreat has been what ideas don't exist in the startup world in 2021 that should exist to make the world a better place. And so far, we've come up with around 150 ideas. And out of these, typically we do two of these retreats a year, so we get 200 to 300 ideas a year. We end up and we go and build two of them. Now, as the preliminary opening or to prepare or set the stage for the retreat, I basically decided to take a step back and think through what are the things we've observed, what are the things we've learned over the last 12 months. And so, as a preparation for this, because when you're always doing, which is what we do on a daily basis, we're like reviewing deals, talking to investors, talking to startup founders, we're spending all of our time executing. It's hard to tell the forest from the trees. We're just, executing. And so it's good to take a step back and take the time to reflect. And that's why, in fact, I love coming to Turks and Caicos to be reflective and think through what are the trends that we've been seeing. And so for this exercise, for this retreat, I'm focused on three things that I shared with the rest of the team and that I really want to share with all of you and the rest of the world. The first thing I did is think through, okay, we've invested in almost 200 startups in the last 12 months. I think we're probably going to invest in 300 startups this year. And what are the mega trends or the trends in the marketplace world that have come out of this? And I will cover this in an upcoming episode in a few weeks. The second thing is, okay, what is coming next in tech? What is really relevant or interesting that we should be focusing on for the next 5 years, for the next 10 years? And the way we think about this is really, frankly, the next 5 years from a time investment horizon, and I'll talk about why. And coming out of that, I did a deep dive in crypto. And so the next episode, not this one, will be, I think the topic will be like, what's up with crypto? What's the status of it? What is it? Why is it relevant or interesting? And where do we stand today? What are the interesting investment areas? But for today, I'm going to focus about what are the most interesting areas to focus on for the next 5 years that are investable of all the trends that maybe might come to mind as general megatrends. So without any further ado, let's get going. Welcome to episode 27, The Tech of Tomorrow. So the way I think about what is a next category that's going to be ginormous, there's one fundamental principle that I look at. And that principle is, what are the ideas that So I see the issue. Le microphone. Okay. So I see what the issue is. Sorry about that. the microphone was not built, was not set up correctly on for this video. So starting again, sorry about that. I'll cut it in the edits for that'll go on YouTube. Basically, the way I think of what are the upcoming categories that are the most interesting on a go forward basis, or things that are marginal that then ultimately become common. And so, second, let me play briefly with the gain. Okay, we're good. Okay, so if you take a step back, someone infamously said in the early days of the computer era, oh, there will be the market for computers is three. There's three computers, they're too expensive, they're not that useful, not all that interesting. And what made IBM is in the 1960s and 70s into the behemoth it ultimately became is when mainframe went from being like toys that are not toys, but really only have very specific applications to being common, and every major organization started to use them. Likewise, in the 1980s, I got my first PC in 1984. It was kind of considered a toy or a hobby. Like most people around me didn't take it seriously, didn't take the fact that I was keep playing with it, like taking it apart, building it, etc., particularly seriously. But when Bill Gates' vision of a computer in every home became realized, it created the massive Wintel duopoly of these large organizations. Likewise with gaming. When I saw PC gaming in the early 80s, it was a niche, tiny market. Today, gaming is a $140 billion market. It's bigger than the movie industry. It's bigger than the music industry. And then all other forms of entertainment. I think maybe even combined, it might be the largest form of industry. And so things that go from fringe to becoming mainstream create these ginormous opportunities. So as I think through the future, I'm trying to put myself in that same frame of mind of what things are marginal or fringe that will become mainstream. So, and the same thing happened in the 2000s with the internet. In the early days of dial-up, where the user interfaces were horrible, where the use cases were limited, you cannot imagine you would build particularly large businesses. But then all of a sudden, Facebook and Google became the super unicorn winners of that era. Likewise, in the smartphone era, when the iPhone was released in 2007, most people, and I think Steve Ballmer, the CEO of Microsoft, completely underestimated it. He's like, oh, they only sold 20 million units. It's super expensive. It's for like rich consumers. It's not compelling for most people. And yet, as it became mainstream, the functionality that came with it and having a GPS, etc., allowed the creation of these extraordinary platforms from Uber to Airbnb to WhatsApp to Instagram to Snapchat, things that were frankly inconceivable before. And so part of the exercise I put myself through is, what are the fringe ideas of today that are still small that could become large in the future? I didn't do a huge amount of research other than like things, so I don't have many slides to present. It'll be really thoughts that people could admit as the next big thing, and then my thoughts on each of these category by category. So, first one that became or was popular a few years ago, but really has actually a number of applications, is virtual reality. So in virtual reality, you already have a bunch of headsets, you already have games, like Half-Life, Helix. If you haven't played it, it's definitely the most compelling game on the platform. The issue is I feel it's actually still early. It's not going to be investable in the next 5 years. And the reason the next 5 years as a category where timing matters is if you're a VC and you're putting money today, typically you have like clear expectations of what it takes to go from pre-seed to seed, seed to A to B onwards, and you have a 10-year fund life. And so you're probably, if you're investing today, looking for an exit in like 7 years, 5 years, 6 years. So if something is 10 years or 20 years away, it's not necessarily a VC backable or applicable. And as I think of virtual reality, it still feels early, actually. And the reason it feels early is, let's do an analogy with the world of the iPhone and the smartphone world. So if you started building games, for instance, the game, which is the biggest category in both Google and Android store or Play Store and the iOS, in 2007, you did okay. But actually, you didn't do the best. The best time to build an iOS gaming company was 2012. In 2012, Supercell was created. And at that point, you had a critical mass of players in two platforms. You had the best practices of monetization, customer acquisition, retention created, and that led to the growth of Supercell, which eventually sold to Tencent for $10 billion and is still doing extraordinarily well in the Tencent ecosystem. So if I compare it to where we stand in virtual reality today, you have a whole bunch of different platforms with sales in the millions of units, and you have a bunch of applications, again, which can only be on some of the headsets. And so you have a fragmented ecosystem, not many new sales, and frankly, the tech still seems lacking. There's still latency. People are still getting motion sickness. The quality of their graphics, if you compare it to what you get on your PS5, your Xbox X, is like incomparably worse. And so it feels to me that we're at least 5 years away. What I would want to see to decide to pull the trigger on virtual reality is 100 million users on one platform that has great tools to build with. And then I think building applications for that platform would make sense. But do I think that's happening in the next 5 years? As it stands, probably unlikely. So not the next big thing for FJ Labs, not the next big thing in the world. Number two, augmented reality. In a way, the fact that we're spending all of our lives in these devices actually doesn't make that much sense. Their small form factor, you're like hunched over, the number of words you can type per minute is kind of limited, and it's kind of interfering with the rest of your life and field of vision. Now, if you've seen the trailer for Free Guy, there's a vision where you put these glasses and it's like this crazy metaverse that you can be part on, and it looks amazing, etc. The thing is that, the first iteration of that, the Google glasses, were kind of a disaster. The quality was terrible. It looked really weird, and it's not probably what's going to make it work. I suspect that in a future where if I can think a thought and control basically the device, and the device might be these super amazing glasses that have lasers that are right in your retina, or intelligent contact lenses that actually overlay whatever you're reading on top of your vision. So if I meet someone, I can actually immediately know who they are, my past interactions, or maybe we can even have a level of augmented telepathy. I think a thought, it's sent to their glasses, and then they can read it, obviously with the right privacy filters on connected. Now, and because I've deliberately sent the thought, the thing is, you actually have the beginnings of elements of that in the lab today. So if you go to the MIT Media Lab, you can put this huge 256 electrode headset on your head, and you connect it to a massive supercomputer. You can train it for hours, and you can fly a plane, virtual plane. You can have your thoughts transcribed to text with pretty low accuracy. It kind of feels like where voice recognition was in the 1990s, where you needed a dedicated hardware, you needed to train it, and it took a long, long time before we got to the Alexas of the world. And so there might be other uses of augmented reality that will be probably mixed in with existing reality, but like pure, proper AR looks like it's 10, 15 years away from where we're at. In fact, Facebook, that was working on brain-machine interfaces for a long time, actually essentially is stopping that effort. They're open sourcing the entire research, and they're moving to having these wrist-driven interfaces because they see it as a more near-term market solution. But do I see it as an investable, interesting product in the next 5 years? Not really. Next big platform change is self-driving. And clearly, and I mean self-driving in general, right? Like, it could be drones, it could be planes, it could be cars, it could be delivery vehicles of some sort of other. And there's been a lot of strides that are being made. I mean, the hype of a few years ago kind of went away, the work was being done, and a lot of progress continues to be made. The issue is more in terms of like human willingness and acceptance of these new platforms and the risk tolerance they're willing to have. And it looks like humans are willing to accept errors of other humans more than they're willing to accept the errors of machines. And so even though you can probably get a self-driving that is as safe as human, it probably would not be accepted by the public. It looks like you need the self-driving car to be much safer than a human before it starts becoming accepted. And then it comes down to a question of cost as well. When is it when is it that it's going to be acceptable, or when is it that it's going to be cheap enough? And there's a platform battle coming on right now between the Googles of the world with Waymo that are LiDAR driven, and the Teslas of the world, and really everyone is in the LiDAR camp, that is trying to use a combination of AI plus webcams to make it cheaper, where the GPUs becoming powerful enough to be able to move on stream. And that battle is still being fought out, but it looks like we're years away. And so if you were thinking of building applications on top of a platform, it still feels very early. I think Amanda just sent a comment on the prior comment on augmented reality. The peripheral signals are much easier to acquire than direct neurological signals, which is absolutely true, which is why many of the people in the like Neuralink or thinking of actually doing wetware, like just keeping a helmet with electrodes that is not directly connected to your brain, doesn't look like it works particularly well, definitely not anytime soon. But are humans really willing to use to implants into their brain? Probably doesn't look very likely anytime soon. So more likely than not, the peripheral side signals are going to be the ones that are going to be used in the early phases of augmented reality. So right now, I've already kind of dismissed 3 of the core categories that people were thinking might be coming in the future, would be interesting platforms for the future. Next one is personalized medicine. I mean, people have been saying, wait, this is insane. If you look at like the Moore's law type cost decreases we're seeing in genetic sequencing, they've been absolutely extraordinary. We went from the Human Genome Project, where it cost billions of dollars to sequence the first the first DNA of a human, to now, you're going 23andMe for a couple $100, you get you get your gene sequence. Now, that's great, but then somehow that has not connected to a world of personalized medicine, where people are doing or creating for you bespoke drugs that are working relative to your personal genetic profile, or maybe your personal biome, etc. And so I've been talking to a number of experts in the field, and it looks like is coming, but it's in the 5 to 10 year horizon. So it's just taking a while before people are using all the data and that they have and interconnected across different fields. Imagine today, if you have an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, you have all this health information, and yet somehow your doctor doesn't use it. Other things that are reasonably ridiculous. If you go to the doctor, probably the first question they should ask you is, what is your diet? And yet that's not even asked. And so we're treating diseases and perhaps not the causes. But that is going to change, but it'll take about 5 years. So related to that, this is a trend I'm a bit on the fence of. I don't know if it's going to become a mega trend, but clearly in the circles I travel in, healthy living, healthy lifestyles has become a trend. Like, everyone I know is like intermittent fasting, either on a gluten-free diet or on a low-carb diet, or sometimes on a keto diet. Everyone's going to the gym, and combination of weight training and cardio training, and everyone's like really trying to increase they're improving their healthiness or their lifestyle to improve not their lifespan, but their health span. And they're taking it extremely seriously. And it's definitely true in the tech community, where there's a lot of biohackers, where people like have glucose monitors on them, they're trying different diets, and they're testing the outcome, etc. And I could definitely see a trend where and historically, the trends or the behavior of the elites have ultimately been copied by the middle class, and then copied by the lower classes. And so there are a lot of healthy companies that are emerging. We're investors in a company called HumanCo, which is created by Jason Karp, who's like this genius former hedge fund guy, who's like the rainmaker for Steve Cohen at Point72, who then realized he had an autoimmune disease, and most people and doctors are telling him, oh, you can't treat it. And then through diet, completely transformed it. And yet now he has a super healthy life, and he's doing amazingly well. But he realized, I also like snacks. Can I build a company around healthy snacks? Not really a tech company per se, though we just tried to invest in Notco, is trying to create plant-based alternatives to like milk and fish and meat and everything else. That is also really, really interesting. Whether or not this goes completely mainstream, unclear, because in a way, the masses in the world at large is addicted to like cheap calories that are not necessarily nutritious, but are definitely very tasty and really inexpensive. So I'm not yet convinced this is going to be like a category where you're going to have $100 billion outcomes. So this one, I'm more like 50-50. We're keeping an eye on it. We're making a few bets. We're making a few investments. Not the place where we're going to be spending most of our time in terms of like the next new or the new thing. Next three, though, I think are going to go from being fringe to mainstream and are going to lead to ginormous categories being created. So the next one is the low-code, no-code revolution, right? When I created my first company, we literally had to do everything. Like the bigger chunk of the tech team was actually building a data center, like assembling PCs and like building. There was not even AWS equivalents or even data centers we could use like Rackspace. We basically had to do everything on our own, and everything was difficult and expensive. It took millions to just turn the lights on. And so the first thing that happened, and at that time you needed like Oracle databases and Microsoft Web Server licenses. So the first thing that happened that tried to democratize startup creation, made it cheaper, was the open source movement. When you had MySQL and PHP and then pretty much everything else that came after that, it made software, you didn't need to pay millions of dollars in licenses to make things. And that lowered barriers to entry, made things a lot cheaper. The next thing that happened that helped was the cloud computing movement, where all of a sudden you could use AWS and you no longer have all these fixed costs. With 50K and you can have everything at variable cost basis, you can make things, you can launch a startup and make it a lot easier. The issue is you still needed a code. And if you still needed a code, that limited the type of founders you would get to a rather small subset of the population. The no-code movement, started probably with companies like Shopify and it's low-code / no-code and Squarespace that started allowing people that were like designers and artists or frankly small business owners to build their own company without actually needing the code. Now, Shopify is still reasonably hard to set up. It's not completely user-friendly or no code per se, but it's definitely low code. And that has created, obviously, a $100+ billion company, and it is a total mega trend. But that's only phase one. And the phase one is we're going to help you build a store, help you build a website. Ultimately, the no-code revolution will get to the point where you could build anything in no-code. You can build a marketplace. You can build a mobile app. And the emerging player in this category that is really interesting is a company called Bubble. And with Bubble, you can build especially mobile responsive sites that are really amazing. And imagine the democratization that happens in a world of no code where anyone from anywhere in the world all of a sudden can start building tech applications. I think we're going to see a plethora of explosion from, frankly, the entire world. It's not going to be just the major cities or, frankly, in the early days, just Silicon Valley. It's going to come from everywhere in the world, and not just the capitals, but the secondary cities. And it's going to happen in Africa. It's going to happen in Southeast Asia. We're going to see a lot of creativity and ideas that would have never come to our mind because now they're started to come from out of left field by more people that didn't have that have maybe more artistic sensibilities, that didn't have all the tech skills to build companies until now. Absolute mega trend. To date, we're not investing in no code per se as much as we're using no code. So all of the companies we're building or using low code, no code companies, all of our e-commerce companies, all of our marketplace companies, or essentially building on top of Shopify because they're already best practice. I did one of my episodes on how do you build an MVP for 15K, which is mind-boggling that you can build an amazing site for so little, and that's with you not even doing the work. If you did the work essentially for zero, you can have your MVP and do all of the tests. So most of the companies that are being built on low code today or no code are really agencies to allow others to do MVPs for cheap. That's not a tech scalable company, not particularly interesting. We're more users of no code. Now, the most compelling company is Bubble, but there are many others out there that are emerging vertical by vertical, category by category. Absolute mega trends, totally investable today, or definitely usable today, and will be relevant in the next 5 years. Next thing is psychedelics. Now, in a way, acceptance of psychedelics has become more mainstream as the world in the US specifically has moved towards legalization of marijuana. And we're seeing states by state it become legalized, become legal in Canada not that long ago. I'm sure there's a future where it'll be legalized at the federal level in the US as well, instead of just being decriminalized, let's say. Now, what's interesting is you start studying the history of the substances. And Michael Pollan's books, and he has two books that are really relevant. One is the How to Change Your Mind, and the other one is this new book on the history, essentially, of caffeine, alcohol, and tobacco. And it's interesting that we live in a world where essentially we have two substances that are really toxic and really addictive, and frankly, three if you add sugar, that are illegal. So tobacco, alcohol, and sugar. And then you have a bunch of them that are non-addictive, actually have lots of positive side effects when you take them in the right setting, in the right environment, with the right intention, that are illegal, which are LSD and psilocybin, especially. And obviously, you don't want to touch opiates or any of that. And what's interesting is if I look at the world around me, most people in the tech scene, many of the people I know, go to ayahuasca circles. Yes, thank you. Amanda says that book is This Is Your Brain on Plants. If most of the people in my circles, go to Burning Man and they drop acid, or they do psilocybin journeys, usually guided with sound bath, or they sit in ayahuasca circles, and they find that these experiences, for the most part, when you do it rather rarely, it's actually not super enjoyable necessarily. It's more like interesting, or extraordinarily compelling, and often it feels like you have a communion with the divine, right? Like you're experiencing these extraordinary religious or quasi-religious experiences on your own. And so it seems odd that these things have become illegal. It looks like a lot of it came from a reaction by Lyndon Johnson in the late 60s, where basically the anti-war movement were people that were consuming acid, and especially at that time, the magic mushrooms as well. And so as a means of discrediting them, you made it illegal. And by the way, you could actually, so it seems to have been driven more by political reasons. By the way, the making marijuana illegal seems to have been also driven by a combination of racism, by especially the Nixon administration back in the day. So it seems to have had a lot of history without actually looking at the underlying science. And what's interesting is the science is actually very compelling. So we've made a few investments in the category. We invested in Christian Angermeyer's company called Atai, and Atai is looking at medical applications for the different substances. And they've created another company, Compass, which recently went public, which is a psilocybin health company, which is doing extraordinarily well. So we're in the early phases of that, and we're seeing extraordinary early results in the clinical trials. Ptsd, which has been extraordinarily resistant to basically frankly, any treatment possible, where it seems to be doing reasonably well with MDMA. And depression, when you do, the problem is the sample size is pretty small, but they've done a number of studies, SSRI versus nothing versus psilocybin, and it looks like the psilocybin treatment is more effective and with fewer side effects. And so it seems really early, but I suspect that this is a category where it's something that's fringe, consumed by a minority today, and will become mass market. And when that does, it'll create ginormous opportunities and ginormous companies. Now, for us at FJ Labs, we invested in it more out of curiosity more than a core thesis, just because these were either biotech companies, or they're not really marketplacey, or not really tech companies necessarily if you're just creating medical applications of the use of existing plants. But definitely an area of interest. An area of interest, but not the core. Which I guess brings me to the last area of blockchain and crypto. The issue is most people don't really understand what blockchain is, how it works, and they just see this as this speculative frenzy of different coins that may or may not have a use, that just purely because other people might think it might go up in value, you invest in. And they don't understand what ultimately it is. And what the blockchain is essentially a decentralized computer. And especially if you think of the way Ethereum works, it's a decentralized computer, and you can build these applications on top of that computer. And the fact that it's decentralized has a bunch of qualities. Now, it has a bunch of downsides as well. It's slower, it's more expensive. You pay the gas fees on Ethereum. But it has a bunch of benefits, which means it's a lot more secure. And there's some applications that make sense to use or to have in a decentralized way. And there's some applications that make sense to have in a centralized way. And so when you start thinking of it that way, we're seeing that there's an opportunity to reinvent entire elements of, frankly, the current economy, especially the financial system, in a decentralized way, in a way that's really interesting, where you can track all the transactions, where you can make it a hyper secure, etc. And we're seeing another interesting ways of basically seeing the creator economy may perhaps move in a decentralized way, where both you would own directly the things that you get by getting by the creators, and the creators can find a way to monetize their craft. And so as I look at the future, I say, okay, today, what is crypto? When you remove the speculative trading around the currencies, where people don't really understand what crypto is, and it's just like a kind of a gold rush, or like issuing things that may or may not have value, and you look at like what are people doing today, it's a couple 100,000 developers that are building these applications, but in many cases it looks like you're reinventing fundamental branches of the economy in a more interesting new way. Look at Uniswap, and I'll do a deeper dive in crypto in the future. But Uniswap is a company with 30 employees that was created 3 years ago, and now is doing $1 billion a day in trading volume, and in a completely decentralized way, which is really extraordinary and exciting. And we're seeing all the core components, both of finance and in some of elements of the gaming and creator economy being moved online. The actually, Crew44 suggests climate change. Actually, no, you're right. Climate change is another big category. The question has been, when is it investable by VCs? Actually, I should have added this here. It definitely is missing. I actually think the time is now. It used to be that if you want to be in the climate world, you needed billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars to build hardware. And then that hardware would, you would build a solar plant, or you would resell it to the grid, but it was really expensive. It wasn't really a VC game. This is changing because we're moving from a world of atoms to a world of bits. And so software is starting to play a much bigger role. And so absolutely, you're right. Climate change is missing here. It is one of the core categories that is going mainstream. It's going mainstream in the public appreciation of it, but it's definitely going mainstream in the ability to build companies in a tech scalable way. We're investors in a company, of course, if the name Leap.ac, which is like an edge management for the grid to help them balance with where the electricity is coming from, if it's coming from like electric battery farms, or if it's coming from solar, if it's coming from elsewhere. We're investors now in marketplaces for carbon offsets. We're investors now in actually even companies that are like giving away products to decrease emissions in exchange for carbon credits. So there's a lot of opportunities. So, and I definitely think the next 5 years is ripe for building these extraordinary companies. So yes, climate change, another big category that is relevant. So summary of all this, where I think it's going to be really interesting to focus on the next 5 years. I guess healthy lifestyle, maybe. We are investing in it, but it's not like core focus. No code, absolutely, especially as a user of it, in order to build more interesting companies. Psychedelics as a category in general, but perhaps it's not like, you're not necessarily building tech companies. Blockchain and crypto, absolutely. And then climate change. Now, what I'll do, and I'm going to pause this episode kind of at this. And what I'll do is next week, I'm going to do a deep dive on blockchain and crypto. Is like, what is it? How does it work? What are the use cases? What are the most interesting applications? And how is that at FJ Labs, if you're a normal venture fund, how are we going to go after the category? And then the next episode after that, I need to do it in an environment where I have good internet, etc. So it might be a few weeks. I'll talk about the latest marketplace trends. Because even though we've invested in like 200 or 300 marketplaces in the last 12 months, there's because of that, there are a few clear things that are emerging that are probably worth sharing. And there are a lot of interesting things the last 12 months will, impact or read into the coming 12 months. So with that, I'll stop. If any of you have questions, comments, etc. But clearly the most requested, let me change to the most requested, let me make sure you still have sound. Yeah, the most requested episode was let's do something in crypto. And I figured before I do something in crypto, I want to talk about why, what are the categories that might be interesting and why crypto is actually interesting now, which, this episode kind of covers. And next week, I'll do a deep dive on what's up with crypto. And I think we're good. So I'll pause it at that. And I look forward to seeing all of you next week. Thank you for joining today.